Museum is called Tread of Pioneers Museum, and it was actually named after a book that my granddad had written in 1945, and he got the name of the book from a quote from Whittier, and I'll read it to you because I think it's really apropos today. I hear the tread of pioneers of nations yet to be, the first low wash of waves where soon shall roll a human sea. So that's pretty apropos for today, especially driving downtown. So he took this quote and I hear the tread of pioneers and named his book The Tread of Pioneers. And basically, he was the editor of the paper. He bought the paper in 1896 for $100. And that was his true love, and he was known as being one of the great editorial writers of that time. And he was also involved in politics, like my father was. And one thing, my grandfather was not too well known, but he was one of the original Moffat Tunnel commissioners, and this was an elected office. And he was on the original board. Building the railroad, it cost $14 million to build a railroad from Denver to Steamboat. It was $75,000 a mile. And the railroad came here in 1909, but the tunnel actually wasn't built until 1923. So you say, how did the train get over here? Well, it actually came over Rollins Pass. It came over kind of where Berthoud Pass is. So that it was the highest railroad in the world at that time that was not a small track railroad. It was a regular track railroad. And so it was started in 1923 and finished in 1927. So it took 4 years to build that tunnel. And Granddad, they sent him back to New York City, and he stayed at the Waldorf Astoria. And they brought a special car down to him, and he went to Wall Street. And they went to a bank with armed guards, and they signed a check, a deposit slip for $6,720,000. So that's basically what the Moffat Tunnel cost. And then that debt was just recently, I guess it was about 8 or 10 years ago, it was paid off. But it was paid off with a property tax, or a Moffat Tunnel, a tunnel tax that's on your property. And that was paid off a number of years ago. But it took from 1927 to just a couple years ago to pay off this $6 billion, and I'm sure the interest was probably 10 times that.
My husband, he was a foreman of them, and he could walk clear away and leave them, and when he come back, his work would go just the same. If we'd have a snow slide or a rock slide, the train would stop, and I'd get up 1, 2 o'clock in the morning to cook breakfast for him. Many times I've seen those men go out to work when it was 60 below zero and come in at night with their faces solid ice.
I remember coming to Colorado and having a lot of fears about it. I was very frightened of the mountains. It seemed to me that that was a very scary experience looking down out of the train. I was sick all the way over. I think it was mostly from fear that the train was going to fall off of the track in places. It was very scary to me coming from flat country and never having had ridden a train.
When you get up that canyon and over the divide, you have Fraser Canyon to tease you, and Byers Canyon to annoy you, and Gore Canyon to make you swear. What's on west, I have never seen. Drilling in hard rock was an art, requiring a strong back and not a little skill. I recall that we used to say that only a curly-haired Swede could drill blue granite, and none of us had ever seen a curly-haired Swede.
Back in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s, we'd go to Steamboat on the passenger train. One came in the afternoon and went out in the morning. You could ride from Sydney to Steamboat for 50 cents, and it took about half an hour or less. Quite often we rode the train. We used the railroad for transportation to and from school. Some of the Sydney teachers also used to get it to and from school. Farmers on weekends would use the railroad to ship their cream to Denver. The creamiers would buy it, test it, and send back the empty cans along with the checks.
We took a train that stopped at Steamboat Springs, and we came over Corona Pass over the Continental Divide. That was long before the Moffat Tunnel came to be. We sat on top of Corona. They had a big rotary plow plowing the track because wind would blow it shut overnight. They held the train there for 6 hours till they could get it plowed open. Then we came on to Steamboat Springs and took a wagon up to Clark. We got just above Clark 2 or 3 miles and transferred to a sled that went on to Hans Peak. It took 2 days to get to Hans Peak just from Steamboat.
I was on the first train to leave Steamboat. It was in January 1909. It cost us $22.50 to go to Denver.
The first train to run into Steamboat Springs that carried passengers was in 1909. There was a group of us school children who hired a man with a sled and a team to take us to Sydney. We met the train there so we could say that we rode into Steamboat on the first train, even though it was only that short distance. As we would look back through the car, the track was so unstable that the cars rocked back and forth. The tracks hadn't settled yet. It was a little while before they really got settled.
Tourists started to come on those first few trains. The ones I remember so distinctly were the people from Chicago that stayed at the Cabin Hotel in the summer. They would stay 2 or 3 months. They had to stay a while because it cost so much to get here.
When I was 6 years old, my folks went to the stock show. The only way was by train. That was before they opened the Moffat Tunnel. We had went over Corona, over the top, and got stranded up there. The wind had blown the track shut. That's really rugged up there when it storms. They got stuck up there with that train. We were 3 days on the train from here to Denver. I remember they ran out of food and water.
My dad told me when he would ride cattle trains to Denver in the caboose that the train curved so much that you could shake hands with the engineer when he came around the corners.
I can remember the train ride when the railroad had just been completed. They used to give us all rides from Yampa down to almost Phippsburg. I remember that everyone used to get a big thrill from the ride. The only reason that they let us all ride was mainly for the publicity. Everyone would ride because at that time, that was a big thing. I recall that the train was nothing like the trains of today. Then it only had 2 or 3 coaches.
When I get to hell, I'll have more seniority over everybody because nobody has ever shoveled as much coal as I have.
and they were very musical, and they had a ranch around Hans Peak. So Portia would take the girls up for a dance at the schoolhouse. And one night, one afternoon, she asked me if I'd drive the black Ford truck up with girls riding in the back and Agnes DeMille riding in front with me. So I told her, yes, I'd be glad to take them up. And we knew we were going to a square dance. And so the girls were all dressed with their little square dance dresses, and Agnes DeMille was simply dressed, and I was dressed in my Levi's and gay shirt because I knew I might have to change the tire before I got back. So, well, during the evening, I knew that Pop Wheeler and the boys might be a little embarrassed or not feel quite comfortable dancing with one of the leading dance instructors at Perry-Mansfield. So when I introduced her, I just introduced her as Agnes and one of the counselors at camp. And they began to dance with her. And we were doing the schottish and square dancing and having a very nice time, and the girls were happy and dancing with the young men that were there, the Wheeler boys and some of the local ranch boys. And Pop Wheeler came up to me and he said, Shannon, you brought a dance teacher. You didn't bring just a counselor. The teacher I had brought was Agnes DeMille. Well, during the evening, Agnes was very charmed with this lovely, simple, pure American folk dancing. And she said to me, this is truly American. Of all the dancing I've studied, this is the most interesting and the most true and the most fun-loving. And pretty soon the Vesuvienne came. She didn't have Pop Wheeler or the boys had gotten other partners, so she came over and said, come on, Shannon, teach me this step. So I danced the Vesuvienne around 2 or 3 times, and after about the second round, she was dancing it very beautifully and very lightly. And everybody stopped their dancing and watched us. They watched her, not me. And she came back to camp, and in the next week or two, she began choreographing rodeo. And she would ask some of us Westerners how this was done or how that was done in the new ranch world. And she trained the boys at camp to do very authentic movements of certain things like roping and pretending to ride and washing their face in a old outside dish of washpan. And she would ask us if this were the right movements. She took this to New York, and it became quite famous and was on Broadway for quite a while. From that, when they started Oklahoma, they knew she probably could do the best job of choreographing the Oklahoma dances, which became quite famous and quite beautifully done. And it all started at Hans Peak Schoolhouse.
I'd always look at Storm Mountain down the street, at the end of the street, and thought, that's going to be a great place to ski. And early on I decided, I think in the early 50s, that I was going to investigate that mountain and see how feasible it really was. So it was in my mind when we really started to do that in 1955 and 6. I guess it was in 54 and 5, I took horseback trips up the mountain and over the top. I think it was the second year that we'd been doing that I took Paul Hawk, who was supervisor from the White River, which also had charge of the Routt Forest, over the mountain, and other pretty large groups. There'd be 20 or 30 of us sometimes that would ride to the top. And then in the wintertime, we took several snowcat trips across from the top of Rabbit Ears Pass, and we'd ski Jure, and Marvin Elkins had several snowcats from the REA and others of his own, I think, and we'd gather up all that kind of equipment we could. And we didn't have snowmobiles in those days for a few years there, but they worked pretty good. We got into the top of Storm Mountain, about 10 miles across there, and we'd ski down then and look at the mountain. And it was great trips going down over there. In 1958, it was the year Lisa was born, our daughter. The day after she was born, Bud and Loris Werner and I climbed the mountain from the base out at Walton Creek at 4 in the morning. We were on top at 8. We carried our skis up on the crust, walked up, and skied down. And that was a great trip, too. I think we came out at Fish Creek Falls on that one, and kept looking at more and more of the mountain to see if there was any big problems, and it mainly looked like a great place to ski.
As many of you know, the person who really had the dream of Mount Werner was Jim Temple. And Jim Temple came to me, I think it was in 1957 or 58, and at that time we started skiing over the mountain. We would backpack over from Rabbit Ears Pass and ski down the mountain, and of course in those days the mountain was completely tree covered, and we had to bushwhack our way through. And on many of those occasions, Skeeter's brother, Buddy Werner, skied with us, as did Loris. I remember once Loris, when all 5 of us climbed over there. If I recall, you and your brother kind of got lost that particular day going over there.
Oh, John, you wouldn't do that.
Anyway, that's how the mountain started. And in 1958, the Nash family, Willis Nash, Merle Nash's father, donated equipment, and we started clearing the first trails, Voodoo, Simi, at the base of the mountain. And it wasn't until 1962 that we were able to put money together with a new group that was formed under Hank Perry of Denver to build the first lift. And my recollections of that were pretty traumatic, because I can remember taking a ranch truck to Long Beach, California, and bringing back the 2 bull wheels for that first lift. So that's kind of how the thing all started.
And you were one of the co-founders of that original company, right?
Yes,
Together
Mountain. With Jerry Groswald and Marvin Crawford.
And that was the Storm Mountain...
Well, that was called the Storm Mountain Ski Corporation at that time.
And then afterwards,
well, then it
didn't work out too well.
Well, then it changed its name when Hank Perry took over to Winterland Engineering. And then when the mountain was renamed after Buddy Werner, we changed the name to the Mount Werner Ski Corporation. And then we operated the mountain for approximately 9 years until LTV bought out the original partnership. But I'll never forget the first year when we opened in January 12th, 1963, which of course is just 21 years ago. The temperature that particular day was the coldest day that I can remember in Steamboat. It was 40 degrees below zero at the ranch. I came in that day after getting a car started, and we found that the gearbox was frozen. We couldn't even get that started. And Hank Perry drove over from Denver, and if you please, he ran into our only customer. And that particular year, we had 2,700 ski man days with a total revenue of about $3,000. Needless to say, it didn't pay very many bills.
Little funny thing to tell about John and talking about the lifts and the beginning is we really didn't have a lot of personnel, and John was the ski patrol, or Merle was the ski patrol, and we sold all the lift tickets. We had the ski patrol, the ski school, the store in the bottom of the A-frame building. And oftentimes, if John had to be up working on a trail, I would take a class over to the Palma lift, and John would say, "Now, you just punch that button, and it will start." So I'd line my class up, punch the button, take the class up to the top of the hill. We would have our lessons, ski down, and punch the button, and start all over again.
Well, Skeeter, you remember that first year, we never even had a top attendant on our chairlift. And we told everybody, get on. If you don't get off, you'll come down again.
Yes.